Hello everyone, my name is Colin. I am the owner of the C-Trent03 YouTube channel, and as many of you know, I one day wish to become a pilot. However, flight training is expensive, and as a 16-year-old student, I often don't have the time to go take lessons. So I use flight simulators to help accentuate my training at home. One of the tools from these flight simulators is called VATSIM, which is a realistic network that connects you to air traffic controllers that are real people, by the way, and are trained to guide you in the virtual skies. And that's pretty much what most of my channel is about. However, this series in particular is just a little bit different, as instead of flying inside of those virtual skies, I'm the one controlling the virtual skies. If you saw any of this playlist, you'll know that recently I got my S1 training completed at the Memphis RTAC. It was also a Tier 2 rating, which for those of you who don't know what any of that means, it essentially means that under the Memphis airspace, I can control any airport as a ground or clearance delivery operator, which essentially means that I control most active taxiways and hand out VFR and IFR clearances as needed. But I never planned to stop this series as just an S1, so today we're cracking up the second act, if you will, for my series, and we're beginning my S2 training. If any of you saw this episode, which is the first episode to this whole series, this is going to be pretty similar to that. However, instead of just playing the montage and letting you guys watch me study, I'm going to go over each unit for the VATUSA Academy as an S2 as I study it. I thought this would make it a little bit more interactive for you guys and more entertaining. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this video. The first thing I had to do, which can be seen at the bottom of the page, is to complete 30 hours as a delivery or ground position as an S1. And I'll be honest, in the beginning, I thought that rule was pretty dumb. But as I continued to control, I actually saw the value in it. It made me more comfortable with the airports in Memphis, and not only that, but it made me more comfortable working with the controllers in Memphis as well. Some of which I'd actually like to mention now. If you want to skip straight to the next part of this episode, no worries, here's the timestamp. But for now, here's a couple shoutouts. First of all, the air traffic manager at ZME, Dylan Lundberg, has answered more questions for me than I can count on my fingers and my toes. I really appreciate you, Dylan. Always, you're a massive part of this process, so definitely a massive shout out to him. Chin is also another guy I'd like to mention. He has the S3 at the ZME Airspace, and Chin is just a great guy to be around. And he's actually here for this session that I'm currently recording over right now. In fact, Chin's been there for almost 24 hours of my 30 hours that I had to build up. So it'd be pretty much impossible to talk about these 30 hours and not mention Chin. And last but not least, Noah, Henriora, and Maxwell. I really appreciate you guys. We staffed Nashville several times together in my first couple hours as a controller, and at one point we staffed Fort Smith, which probably hasn't been done in ages. So massive shout out to all of those guys, and without further ado, that completes the 30 hours and on to the next part of this episode, which, if you reference the S1 to S2 flow, is the first gray box inside of the chart that says that I request access to the VATUSA Academy course, which requires that I contact our training administrator. So I sent Mr. Henry Grayer an email, and voila, a wild VATUSA S2 course appeared. Now I just needed to know the material well enough so that I could actually take the exam and pass it. Now before I get into the studying sessions, I want to go ahead and talk about this specific section of the video. The coursework is split into 9 sections. In this part of the video, I'm going to go through each of the 9 very briefly with an overlay of me studying it. It's important to note that if you are an aspiring S2 VATUSA controller, do not use this video to replace the training that has been assigned to you. And besides, I'm only really going to be giving broad statements that describe the category. I'm not going to go into the specific details that you need. Okay, now that I got that out of the way, let's have some fun studying. We start at Unit 4.1, which goes through the basics of being a local controller. A local controller controls all the active runways at an airport, whether that be departures or arrivals, or coordinating crossings of the runway with ground. It is important to note that if no ground is online on VATSIM, because we are a top-down service, the tower will also control the ground operations. Unit 4.2 goes through the use of runways, most importantly the selection of the runway based off of wind or the SOP for the airport. It also goes over closed runways and how to put those into your NOTAMs, and crossing coordination with a ground operator. It also goes over landing procedures, takeoff procedures, the specific phraseology for such, as well as the same runway coordination, and last but not least, lineup and wait procedures. Otherwise, that's about it for 4.2. Unit 4.3 goes through simultaneous, same and opposite direction operations. So if an aircraft is taking off or landing in the same direction and how to go about handling those procedures, and if an airplane is taking off or landing in the opposite direction of another and how to go about handling those procedures. It also talks about different classifications for aircraft and how those will affect separation both vertically and horizontally from other aircraft. Unit 4.4 is about wake turbulence and how that affects you as a controller and the planes on the ground. It also goes through pretty much all of the procedures you'll need to follow to ensure that no damage is done to any aircraft because of wake turbulence. Next is Unit 4.5, which talks about all the procedures for VFR aircraft, and it also talks about the traffic pattern, as that's one of the major things that a tower controller will have to do, especially on VATSIM. Unit 4.6 goes through, you guessed it, more separation. This time it's specific to airports that have radars. Now, every airport in VATSIM has radars, so every S2 controller will need to know this. But it also goes through more things, like takeoff procedures, landing procedures, go-around procedures, and failed takeoff procedures. Now, most of those things are really specific to airport SOP, so it covers it pretty broadly. Unit 4.6 also had a comprehension quiz. It took me 3 tries to get 100, but sure enough, I finally got there. Unit 4.7 goes through specific military and helicopter operations, basically all the takeoff procedures, landing procedures for helicopters, and in the same way for military. Military has its own special requirements sometimes, so it kind of just covers those. Now, I do think it is a little bit weird that we have these in VATSIM, but nonetheless, it's here, and it's probably going to be on the test, so I studied it. Unit 4.8 covers radar coordination for releases, which is basically when you have to coordinate an aircraft taking off with an overlying controller before you give the takeoff clearance. And last but not least, Unit 4.9, which goes over the radar capabilities of different airports and how that will affect you as a controller and your operations. This one also had a progress check, and I ended up getting 100 on that. So now, it was time for me to take the test. The S2 test is comprised of 40 questions. In order to pass it, you must get above an 80%. So, I would love to show you me taking the test and all the things that went along with it, because it was about a 2-hour-long process for this test. Unfortunately, I can't record any of the test itself, so all I can really do is tell you what I got on it. On my first try, I got an 89. So I passed. It wasn't as good as I thought it would be, but you know what? After all the studying that I've done, I really have put in a lot of work for this. I don't even care. I got my 89. And my reward for passing this test was, well, you guessed it, another test. This one was the Tier 2 test, so that I'd be rated to work the Memphis airport. This test was comprised of 15 questions, and once again, I had to get an 80% to pass. And on that one, I got an 83. Once again, it's not as good as I was expecting, but you know what? I passed, so I can't complain in any measure. But other than that, that's about it for this video. The S2 training course wasn't bad at all. It was just a lot to remember. I want to let you know that I look at the VAT USA stuff a lot more than just the studying I did on this video. In fact, I probably studied all that material for 10 hours plus. I spent practically my whole Thanksgiving break just sitting here and studying the material. And now, that section of the course can finally be closed for a little bit. Not too long though, because give or take a month and we'll be starting our first sweatbox session for the S2 Academy. But for now, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you should like, subscribe, do whatever can help the channel. Now, it's not required to watch my videos. If you're just here to enjoy the content, you don't want to like, you don't want to subscribe, that's okay. Your presence is enough and it contributes. But as always, I'm a small content creator. I'm looking to grow a community that has the same interests. So if aviation is one of your passions, then join up. I'm going to leave an invite for the Discord inside of the bio of this video. If you want to join, go ahead. If you don't, that's okay too. Once again, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys in the next one, and for now, be safe.